live in a world in which 8 men own the same amount of wealth as the bottom half. Now, injustice doesn't know borders, and neither must we. We have to connect the struggles that we all face. The problems we have differ in specifics and scale, but there's so much in common. Whether it be austerity across the Western world, when millions of people were expected to pay for a crisis caused by the financial elite. Whether it be privatization, the attack on healthcare and education, the attack on workers' rights, the attack on women who've suffered so much of the brunt of the attacks of the last few years, the attacks on the young. And we've seen so many inspiring movements across the world who are fighting back. And we have to join the dots. We're not going to win unless we have a global movement against all forms of oppression, exploitation, violence, and bigotry. And I think that's what this whole session is about. I'm here on a panel with absolutely inspiring, courageous activists who are fighting to build a better world free of the injustices that don't just scar our world, but define it in so many ways. And the success of their struggles will be absolutely critical in building the world that all of us are here because we're part of it. Now, I want to kick things off because I want to get straight into this because we're the left and we tend to run a bit late. It's a tradition. We have our traditions. First of all, I want you to give a big round of applause for somebody in the United States who's at the absolute forefront of the struggle of Labour. They were there supporting the candidacy of Bernie Sanders in his struggle to fight for a different sort of United States, for the 99%, not the 1%. She's the executive director of the National Nurses United Union of the United States, the largest union to back Bernie Sanders. Please give a big round of applause to Bonnie Castillo.
Thank you, everyone. Is this working? Is it working? Okay, great. Thank you. And greetings, brothers and sisters of the world transformed. I'm so happy to be here. And I bring you greetings from nurses, from the National Nurses United. We stand with you in solidarity, and we share your vision. We are just so honored to participate this year. We are the largest union of registered nurses in the United States, but that's not what makes us great. Our power rises out of our steadfast commitment to workplace democracy for nurses, but also for all workers in the U.S. We are a predominantly female union, female-based union with a very strong tradition of militancy. We are committed to deep education with our members about the importance of solidarity and the power of collective action. In addition to this, our commitment to social justice, it arises very organically. It arises organically out of the nurse commitment to patient advocacy. And it is that patient advocacy that has inevitably led us to understanding that health is connected and directly linked to social and economic justice. Nurses, in particular, have led a very long and hard struggle to bring about an NHS-like system called Medicare for All to the United States. We have sponsored legislation, we've spoke out in many community forums, demonstrated, we've been arrested, and we've knocked on many doors. For us, Medicare for All is a bedrock issue. Those values that guided us to fight for healthcare justice not only guided us to fight for healthcare justice, but also have pointed the way for us to fight for the values, priorities, and morals based on the needs of the many and not the few. 70 years ago in the UK, you achieved universal health care. It was a model for the rest of the world. It is a model, but I know that you have a fight. You have a fight in front of you. The NHS has undergone 20 years of creeping privatization, marketization, and commodification under this deceitful policies of austerity and the deceptive concepts of efficiency, efficiency of the private sector, patient choice, modernization. We've seen all of this in the US, and the commonality of our struggles is very clear. Ours is to gain healthcare justice. Yours is to keep it. And our fight our fight is not limited to healthcare. In both our countries, all institutions that serve the common good are under attack. Our enemy has a very clear global agenda. It is about privatizing the profits and socializing the risks. So, we not only share your vision, we also share a common enemy. Our opponent sees the world through this brutal lens of social Darwinism and the right to rule by complete exploitation and subjugation. It is in many ways this cruel fairy tale, and it is a seductive story that we see play out all the time in our workplaces, where individuals are assessed and their individual worth is a part of their financial success. That's an indicator of societal worth. And the failure to achieve this financial wealth is deemed a personal failing, never a societal failing. So our enemy views these institutions for the public good as fertile grounds for profiteering. And that's exactly what they're doing here. And the source of this, I mean, they are very delusional in thinking they actually believe that these public goods are rightfully theirs. And to that end, our enemy consistently portrays a very warped vision of the public sector as an insatiable parasite that unfairly takes the earnings of hardworking people to feed its incompetency. And in that distorted vision, what we see is the private sector emerges as this moral superior. I would imagine that's somewhat familiar for all of you. In the US, this deceitful version of reality is present throughout all of our media, well, except for, I will say, we do have wonderful sources of media, such as the Laura Flanders Show, and I know she's here today. But it has dominated many of all of our information sources, so you will rarely see the truth of a people's struggle, right, for equality and justice accurately portrayed in our education system or in our media. As societal sort of inequality deepens and broadens, this, for us, the corporate robber barons, the 1%, view the people as this greedy mob to be controlled, right, to be feared and controlled. And in both the US and the UK, one of the most destructive tools used to control us is rooted in the invention of superiority manifested by racism, xenophobia, sexism, and homophobia. With so much of our societal structure in the control of these international corporate overlords, the odds to overcome might seem insurmountable, but it is a new day. We see it, and here in the UK, you are on a path toward transformation, and your victories are not being achieved through the power of big money. Your victories belong to the power of the people. Your victories belong in trust of working people and your commitment to doing the grassroots work of people-to-people organizing. In the US, we're challenged. We're challenged by an electoral process that dictates and gives domination to a two-party system. And there's this common misconception that the Republicans are the party of business and the Democrats are the party of working people. But the history, right, the years of growing inequality under both parties reveals the truth. And the truth is that they are both firmly rooted in neoliberalism. Yes, the Democrats speak in a sugar-coated and often conflicting rhetoric, but their mercurial loyalty to, and most Democratic politicians, they rely on their corporate contributions for their campaigns, and that can be depended upon to follow the money and not the needs of working people. So it is in this consistent failure of the Democrats to address the needs of the people that has left us in the clutches of an authoritarian madman. And amidst all of this swirling distraction surrounding the U.S. political theater, tragicomedy as it is, it's a clear plot to eviscerate all avenues of collective action. They seek to destroy all our common goods, our healthcare, our education, public services, and our unions. The effort is well funded. I'm sure you've heard about the likes of like the nefarious Koch brothers and their cohorts, and they've been stealthily moving through our governmental systems, particularly our legislative and judicial branches. They have the money. They have control over the sources of information. They control our most powerful court, and they certainly control our politicians. So let's be clear, we in the US are on some very extremely dangerous ground. They are systematically dismantling our public goods and services, and no one is in the crosshairs more than organized labor. But our union, National Nurses United, and other unions, as well as the Bernie Sanders campaign and other progressive forces and voices, have cut through many of these lies. And our weapon is the truth, and the truth resonates. So, to continue to move forward, we have a plan. We do have a plan. Our plan does not rely on politicians. It does not rely on big money. It relies on boots on the ground. It relies in defending our union. It relies on people, talking to people about values and ideals and about what matters to them. Our campaign as nurses is to care for the people, and our campaign is Medicare for All. This is a transformative campaign that opens the doors to the possibility that government could be run for the people and not the 1%. So we're doing a lot. We are in action. We're knocking on doors. We're talking to our neighbors, talking to our patients, and we listen. We listen to people telling us of heartbreaking stories about their inability to afford health care and the nightmares that result. We hear about the absolutely mean-spirited mechanisms of the insurance industry to add huge costs, co-pays, deductions, and denials. The harshest stories to hear are from parents, those who have children with medical needs but do not have the financial ability to pay the cost. Financial devastation is a common theme, and there are so many of these stories, but there are also stories of hard struggle for working people who may have health insurance but are not able to maintain their health with their stymied incomes and steadily rising costs. So we listen and we hear so much pain, but through our nurse lens as patient advocates knocking on every door comes a unifying energy, because we come to the people with care and with hope. The model of people-to-people organizing is about putting the power back into the hands of the people. And we understand that our road to victory is through building a mass movement. It is the model of organizing behind the revolution of consciousness that swept the Bernie Sanders campaign in the US, and it is the model of organizing that has brought about many of your extraordinary breakthroughs here in the UK. So we've trained a lot of volunteers. We work with volunteers in organizing in the communities, and we are learning as we are going, and this is just beginning. There have been incredible victories recently in the US. There's numerous candidates who, running on a pro-Medicare platform, have won their primaries, and every single contender for the Democratic presidential election in 2020 has had to embrace Medicare for all. So I'm going to end here. I'm going to end with just, there's a very simple slogan, and I know that you all probably are familiar with it, but for us, it's the nurses, the workers, the people united will never be defeated. This is our vision. That's what we're about. That's what we're about. So we reach out to you, of the world transformed, and we know what we have to do. We know where our power lies, we know where your power lies, and we are steadfastly committed to continuing to work with you, united in solidarity. Thank you.
So, Bonnie, first of all, fantastic stuff. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because it's so striking, the commonalities that we all face across the Atlantic in those struggles. And if you were going to offer, if you like, advice, what would it be in terms of how we build those bridges of solidarities between the movements in our respective countries?
Well, I think that actually in this trip, it's been incredible to hear about the defense, the very robust defense of the NHS, and specifically, I would say that the sharing of stories. We met some very militant nurses that are really great spokespersons on behalf of the NHS, and these connections between us in terms of what we can provide, and because we have can provide great detail on a privatized healthcare, and I think the exchanges of workers and nurses and telling their stories of the reality to sort of dispel the myths that we hear in each country would be very productive.
And if there's one message you're going to take back from the world transformed to the nurses in the United States, what will that message be, do you think?
Oh, I would say that that we share common, we have a common vision, and also we have a common battle. But this is an incredible space here. Like side by side, the Labor Party. I will say, we have not done this yet. We have not. I mean,
you're working on it.
I mean, but you know what? We can definitely do it. And I've got. And when we do it, we'll have it will be international, and we'll invite you all. So I like that.
Trip to America, everyone.
Yeah.
Give her another big round of applause. Fantastic stuff, Bonnie. Now, there's been nothing as horrifying in our generation, not since the Hillsborough disaster of 1989, than what happened at Grenfell last year, when dozens of working class people were killed in the richest borough, in the richest city in the country, in one of the richest countries that has ever existed. And it was a damning indictment of the entire social order that governs this country. And I think so many of us have been inspired by the sheer determination and courage of that community and its activists in fighting for justice for all of those people who died and survived. And one of those is the next speaker. She's the chair of the Lancaster West Residents Association and a Grenfell Justice activist. Please give a massive round of applause to Jacqui Haynes.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up because unless you're the government, you can't actually transform the world sitting down. A tradition of ours since June has been often, before we speak, to ask for 72 seconds of silence for our family, friends and community who are now deceased. Because we know our time is short here, we can't do that. I'd just like to say that I dedicate every word that I speak today to those people who unfortunately inspired this fight. The talk today, for people who may have been here yesterday, may have echoes of that talk, simply because we were talking about how communities can support each other. But what we are doing is actually working towards transforming our future now. Every move we are making in this recovery is about the future, and the future for everybody. And the first thing to remember is to transform your thinking. Okay, you are me. They will do it to you just exactly as they did it to us if we allow them. Masses of communities came to support us. In the immediate fire and in the aftermath, we were overwhelmed by the support we had from other groups and often quite some influential people, because everybody knew it was wrong. But in the midst of it all, we felt we were alone. Okay, we were alone because only we could fight the immediate battle to secure justice and protection from the panic-ridden, damage limitation-driven recovery that the government had thrown in a one-size-fits-all fashion. And so I make no apologies if there are any repetitions in this message. If it makes a difference, it manifests and it empowers others to make the change in the way that we are. Don't wait, like we did, for tragedy or disaster to be the catalyst for your mobilization to effect justice and equality. We are no longer fighting for ourselves, and our experience must make a difference and bring change across this nation. The time for transformation is now. Take the power, because we are the powerful. To helplessly watch our people cry out for help, to die needlessly, and to stand there knowing that no matter how dynamic you are, there is nothing you can do but watch, is one of the most soul-crushing experiences there is. We have to take the power, but we left it in their hands. We can no longer afford to sit back, accepting that they're the experts, that we don't stand a chance against them simply because we don't have the power. In North Kensington, and particularly on the Lancaster West, which houses the Grenfell, we're no longer going to waste valuable time trying to edify a system that disregards, disrespects, and neglects us. We're taking the power from those who are in power to serve and protect us, yet continuously fail us with purpose. The systems and policies, they're not for the benefit of our community. They're delivered to make us think we have to. There's no way around them, and there's no way under them. But we are proud to have shown that it's not that way. Our revolution is about dismembering the existing power structure and clearing the ritualistic blockages to accessing justice. Policies are not set in stone. They're built, developed, constructed by human beings in power, and they can be destroyed and redeveloped by human beings on the ground. Our ignorance is their best resource. They were the experts, and we sat back and we relied on their knowledge, their morals, and their expertise. When we now know the crime is in the policy, and the policymakers are policing themselves. Grenfell is an unprecedented situation. Nobody's written the book on it. Nobody's written the answers or the resolve. We have a blank page. We've been left to undo the limbo and the panic of the scandal with the systems that they've brought in the panic to make the authorities appear to care and to be doing something. With such a blank sheet, there are precedents to be set, and we must set them. Outright peaceful rebellion against the systems which render us at risk with little or no real protection. This must be driven by a relentless determination and energy for positive and sustainable change. 1 year on, we're almost being left on our own, to build our own future. And for us, it's paramount that we are implementing, we are shaping, and we are influencing the structures of our own environment. As a result, we are being heard, we are being listened to, and we are leading our recovery. We use all those policies and procedures which profess to and legislate fairness and equality, and we turn it around on the policymakers. You wrote it, you put your money where your mouth is. We mean change, we want change, and we will change. They need to show change. They need the nation to think they're doing so much to help things be better for these people. They're sorry. This must never happen again, and lessons must be learned. Their directive is to build trust, to be seen to care, and to be seen to want to resolve. Well, we are the teachers, and we are going to change that tide. With the Grenfell, what we have done is we have made sure that the government want to do it. They want to be seen to be doing it, and so we have made them want to do it. And the biggest factor in that was unity. Whenever you have big struggles, there is so much infighting, which is another big resource for the government. But belief, true belief in victory, justice, transformation, and passion for change, along with truth and transparency, will always bring unity. If you really mean it, your people will feel it. And the main message from this is, as the survivors say, there's no justice, it's just us. So it's down to us to secure justice for Grenfell and beyond.
Well, Jacqui, it's difficult not to be moved and inspired by that, so thank you so much for what you've said. Now, in terms of that spirit of solidarity which was shown, how could we replicate that in our communities across the country, if you like, obviously in very different circumstances?
Well, for us, it was about reminding people and showing that we weren't specially selected for this abhorrent treatment. Millions of people are actually going to sleep at the same risk with the same neglect and indifference that we were. And so really it's to say to people, this is about you, this is about all of us, and recognizing that we are the many. And it is up to us to make a difference. We can talk about legislation, we can bang doors down, but this had to happen before they would even listen. And we can't wait for that, and we mustn't wait for that. If anything, hopefully, we have shown that when you are really angry, when you are really not having it, and when they are really wrong, you can take the power.
And in a practical sense, in that struggle for justice which now is taking place, what can people in this room and beyond do? How can people go into their own communities to build solidarity for that struggle for justice?
Well, first of all, you need to make sure that we all look after each other. I mean, we are down there in North Kensington, but just a weekend here means we have now built a movement that stretches across England. So firstly, it's to make sure that your community understands that there are many other people fighting for the same freedoms and that you don't have to go it alone.
Fantastic, Jacqui. Thank you so much. So inspiring. Now, I believe we have a very special guest. I'm going to check if she's here. She will be hovering above us like a left-wing deity, I think. Is that right, via Skype? Is she going to suddenly magically appear on the screen? Ooh, the suspense. Who am I looking at? Yes! I can see you, Naomi. Yes! Big round of applause! That's a good idea. Naomi, we're just readjusting ourselves so we can see you properly. Bear with me. I hope you heard that love from Liverpool. There's a lot of love for you here.
I'm wearing my brightest, most blinding red.
It's certainly... Is there a contrast button? Sorry. Naomi, Naomi, I speak personally, was, for me, a huge inspiration, I'm sure, for so many other people in this room. In the 1990s in particular, I'm making you feel old now, in the late 1990s, when at a time neoliberalism was so hegemonic, it was the time of there is no alternative, the end of history, the left seemed to be completely defeated and smashed, and she was one of the few voices with a platform to articulate an alternative. We saw the rise of the anti-globalization movements at the time, and her work, like No Logo and so on, was so much tied to that. And she's remained a huge inspiration for global movements. So it's so lucky to have her here in Liverpool with a very, very bright red coat. Now, Naomi, I'm just going to kick things off with some general questions, and we can have a little discussion. We saw this summer fire in the Arctic circles. There was trees burning down in the Arctic circles. That's where we are. Extreme weather across the globe. Can you spell out for us the scale of the climate crisis that faces humanity at the moment?
Okay, well, we'll start on a cheery note, Owen.
Yeah, I thought so. Start on that, and then we'll cheer us up.
Well, first, I just want to say how delighted I am to virtually be with all of you. When I was able to be with you physically last year at conference, I think the last line of my speech was something like, "You've shown us you can win, now you have to win." No pressure. But I know these have been a difficult few months. The smears, the attacks, and so on are relentless. But I think when we listen to the voices on this panel, listen to Jacqui, listen to Bonnie, listen to the stakes in these struggles and in the urgency in the quest for deep transformation in Britain and around the...
Oh, she'll be back. I'm confident. Naomi?
To win,
oh.
Yeah?
Sorry, there was a slight technical hitch there.
Okay.
1 second. Carry on, though. Carry on. We'll get through this.
Am I freezing in really unflattering ways, Owen? Is that what you're
No.
Don't do this to me. I'll just be really careful what facial expressions I make.
There are people taking pictures, but carry on.
Okay. So, I don't believe in a hierarchy of crisis. I don't believe that we should be saying, that climate change is more urgent than the fight against poverty or the fight for racial justice or for the fight for universal good health care. It's all urgent. So what we need are to find solutions that address multiple crises at once, and we can come back to that. But the urgency of the climate crisis is undeniable. We're reminded of this every summer, which is now the season of disaster. I know you had record-breaking heat in the UK and experienced this, and you've had flooding in recent years. You mentioned the fires. I mean, we've had record-breaking fires this summer, last summer, from California to Siberia to Greenland. And And of course, these record-breaking storms. And just in recent weeks, I mean, we should be thinking about people in the Carolinas, in Kerala, in the Philippines, who are all still digging out from record-breaking storms. And every storm that we are seeing now is being supercharged by climate change. It's not to say that there would not have been a typhoon or there would not have been a hurricane. But every storm that comes now comes from an ocean that has a warmer baseline, and it rises from an ocean that already has elevated. So every storm is unnatural. So even though we refer to these still as natural disasters, they're actually unnatural to start with. And the same is happening with forest fires, right? Forest fires are a natural part of the forest cycle, right? I mean, burning is not necessarily a disaster. Within forest management, it makes room for new growth. But the kinds of wildfires that we are seeing are supercharged by drought and supercharged by that baseline of higher temperatures. And so we are seeing very unnatural forest fires. So all of this is confirming what we were warned about from climate scientists, but even a lot of the climate scientists who warned us about this are alarmed at the speed with which we're seeing glacier melt, with which we are seeing their worst forecasts come to reality. So I was just on Thursday night in New York City at a gathering of hundreds of people to mark 1 year since Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And I remember when I was at conference last year, Puerto Rico was still in the throes of that disaster, and FEMA still hadn't figured out how to get them aid, if you recall. What we know now is that cost thousands of lives. There are debates whether it's 3,000 or 5,000 or maybe even more. The responsibility for those deaths is not only climate change. These storms, a storm like Hurricane Maria, would have sent any society reeling. But what really turns these storms into a catastrophe is the intersection of austerity, white supremacy, the fact that not every life is treated of equal value, right? So if you are in a majority black and brown a part of the world, you are not going to receive the same response as if you were in a wealthier white area. And we saw this in the response to Hurricane Katrina. But the other thing that Puerto Rico really underlines is how vulnerable the logic of austerity, the reality of austerity makes a society, right? And Puerto Rico gives us a very acute illustration of this, because before Hurricane Maria hit, Puerto Rico was subject to some of the most brutal neoliberal austerity, very similar to Greece. They had an economic crisis that started in 2006, and this was leveraged to just cut every aspect of the public sphere and privatize everything, really just to the bone. So, for instance, we know that Puerto Rico was in the dark for months and months and months. They just had electricity restored and it isn't stable. But what isn't talked about is that in the years before Maria, thousands of skilled electrical workers were laid off. Basic repairs and modernizations to the grid weren't done. And so, I think in the UK you've experienced some of this where you have firefighting has been cut back, storm defense has been cut back, first responders have been cut back, and then you have these record-breaking storms. And that's really what turns it into a catastrophe. What Jacqui was just talking about with Grenfell, that wasn't a climate change-related fire, but we certainly see just the enormous human costs of this logic of cutting and privatizing to the bone. And so this is just one example of the way we need to make the connections between different movements and have a really intersectional lens.
Now, in terms of struggles across the world, struggles for climate justice, against the climate crises and the interlocking crises, to this gathered room of people who are here because they want to change the world, what are your thoughts on strategies, ideas in the coming years?
Well, we need to be doing a lot all at once. I think one of the first things we need to understand is that we can't wait for this sort of moment off in the future when we take power to begin changing. We need to begin changing wherever we have levers of power. So we need a strategy for taking power, but we also need to be looking at the areas where that power, where it is possible to begin right now. And so that might be at a city level. There is a Labour government in London. London can do more. London can become a beacon or a rapid transition to 100% renewable energy with justice at its center. So can Liverpool, right? And so, one of the dangers of Trump, right, is that everybody looks good in comparison to Trump, right? And so, that can create kind of moral hazards for progressive leaders who are able to very...
Don't tell her. Don't tell her. She looks determined. She'll be back. Let's have a big round of applause so she has a round of applause when she's back. She's back. Sorry, you froze there slightly. Carry on. Sorry, Naomi, carry on.
Terrified. Okay.
Go for it.
Well, I was just talking about the moral hazard of Trump for the sort of pseudo-progressives like, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for instance, who's able to position himself as a kind of an anti-Trump by sending out a few memes, right? But his climate record is absolutely abysmal. He purchased an oil pipeline in order to push it through against against the express demands of indigenous people for that pipeline not to cross their territory, and a pipeline carrying very dirty oil from the Alberta tar sands. I think that what we need to be doing everywhere where a sort of Trump isn't in power, whether it's in a city or whether it's in a country or whether it's in a state or a province, is hold these leaders to a higher standard and demanding divestment from all fossil fuels, and demanding that they use all their levers of power to get us to 100% renewable energy with justice at the center, right? So that means that the communities that have had the dirtiest industry in their backyards need to have the resources to own and control their own renewable energy projects or whatever the green industry is. And maybe it can be owned cooperatively. And so we need these types of models, as well as a strategy for taking power at the national level. I also think we need to be making the connections more and more between climate change and mass migration. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing a rise of increasingly overtly fascist leaders at a time when people know, even if they deny the reality of climate change, that we're going to be seeing more and more people on the move. We don't right now have international laws protecting the rights of climate migrants. And so I think this is something that social justice movements, particularly those that are internationally minded, like the World Transformed, we need to be talking more and more about the rights to move. And another thing I would just say is, to quote Rahm Emanuel, well, I won't quote him, but as you all know, I've been writing a lot about what happens in moments of crisis and how the reins are often seized by the absolute worst people on the planet to push through an agenda that further enriches the already obscenely rich and seizes more power for the already powerful. And we're already seeing talk of this in the context of Brexit, right? And how economic crisis in the UK can be seized to push through an absolutely brutal agenda of further deregulation and privatization. I think we need to do a better job of seizing moments of crisis. And I'm reminded, listening to Jacqui again, those moments when the brutality of the system is absolutely laid bare, right? And people's human reactions are awakened and they want to help. those are the moments when we need to pivot to very bold demands, like the right to decent and affordable housing for every single human being, right?
Just finally, Naomi, before the connection collapses, this has all been fantastic. Now, we may well have a socialist government in this country, who knows, in the next few months. Now,
Do it.
I have a sneaking feeling that global capital might have one or two objections to such a government. What do you think the strategy will be? I mean, in terms of the sort of attack that will happen, and how important, therefore, will it be to build an international movement in support?
Well, it is tremendously important, and I'm reminded last year at conference the way the press distorted conversations, right, where people were just trying to have clear-eyed discussions about the reality that we know there will be a response from international markets if a Corbyn government is elected to try to scare people, right? So, I'm a little bit worried about even my own words being taken out of context. But suffice it to say that world markets will respond to a Corbyn victory, and that we have to prepare for that. We also have to be talking about the fact that there's going to be, the truth is that there's going to be a strong market response to failed Brexit negotiations regardless, right? So I guess what we need to also be talking about is that the context in which a Tory government would likely collapse is an economic context that is very hard for any government that would take power after them, right? I mean, they tend to pass in the same way that women often are brought in to clean up the messes of men at corporations. Socialists are often brought in to clean up the messes of capitalists, right? So we'll have to be very clear in our analysis around when the crisis actually started and who and what precipitated the crisis, because of course it will take no time to blame it on Corbyn, whether or not there is a further capital strike in response to a Corbyn government. So that clarity and the international solidarity will be tremendously important. But I think the more, the reason I focus on shocks and the reason why shocks are an opportunity for the right is because it's about bad things happening that people don't yet understand. It's important to understand that a shock is not just a bad thing happening. It's a bad thing happening for which we don't yet have analysis, and that takes us by surprise. And it's in that gap between event and narrative that it's possible for really bad actors to enter into that gap and say, this is why it happens, and this is what we're going to do to respond. If we have our own narrative before that shock comes, then we're much better defended.
Naomi, it's been an absolute pleasure, an absolute honour. I can't even speak anymore. It's been a massive honour, and in the coming months, your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience will be invaluable for our movement. Please, everyone, give a big round of applause to Naomi Klein. Now, I think you might have heard of the following speaker after Naomi Klein. A lifelong fighter against all forms of oppression, exploitation, and racism. A man who, when the Tories were saying that the ANC were terrorists, he's being arrested for opposing apartheid. A man who, when LGBTQ rights was portrayed as the loony left, he was there standing up for LGBTQ people. A man who, when the West was arming and supporting Saddam Hussein as he gassed the Kurds, he was there standing in solidarity as one of the few MPs who did so. A man who, when the West was on the way to war, a calamitous war with Iraq, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, he was there standing against it. When the war against Libya began, he was one of the only MPs who stood against it. And as leader of the Labour Party, he will be vindicated again on all the big issues of our time, on austerity, on investing in the future, and on a socialist foreign policy. And when he becomes Prime Minister, he will lead the most transformative government this country has ever had. Please give a big round of applause to the next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to the World Transformed. A little bit more about that in a moment. I've just come from the vigil we held with the Yemeni community here in Liverpool. And I think we should send our support to them. They're going through a deeply stressful time because they're getting news from back home of what the Saudi-led coalition is doing to their country and bombing and killing so many people. And the message I gave was quite simply this: we're with them, and whilst I obviously want us to send all the aid necessary to deal with the consequences of the war and the bombing, the best thing to do is stop the war altogether, and to start that by begin that by ending our supply of arms to the Saudi coalition that is undertaking that bombardment. And since the British government is the pen holder at the United Nations on a Security Council resolution, they should have done something about it a long time ago. We're continuing to raise the issue in Parliament, and I wanted to make it clear to the community here, which is why I went to the vigil just now. Can I also say thank you to the World Transformed for the events organised at conference, because to me it's the very lifeblood of our movement, of our party, of the Labour movement history, that there is space for debate, for understanding, for education, to try out ideas and have that kind of discussion. The World Transformed brings a lot of people together in order to explore those ideas and explore them from the principle of the kind of society and kind of world that we want to live in. And I think the World Transformed, to me, is in the best and greatest traditions, but it's also utterly 21st century. We come together at a conference. It's open, people are all welcome, and we use social media a great deal to get people to come, but also to share those ideas. So I'd just like you to thank everyone that put in so much effort to organise the World Transformed. It gets bigger and better year after year. And I heard some of the discussion that you just had before I came in. I was just behind the door there listening to it. And very good discussion it is too. The work that's been done by Naomi in North America, that's done by all of us here, and that sense of unity that we have. Because what we're doing is challenging a neoliberal ideology that took over the world in probably, let's say, 1970s or thereabout, when the whole idea of tax cuts, reduce the size of the state, increase privatization, and trickle-down economics, later inherited by Margaret Thatcher. the brutality of the way in which that kind of Reagan economics was experimented on the people of Chile in 1976 onwards was utterly brutal to them. And then Reagan and Thatcher carried it out in real time in the 1980s with mass privatization, deindustrialization, and we're still paying the price for that in communities all over this country and all over the formerly strong industrial areas of the United States. It's not a way forward to destroy all industry that you've got. It's a way forward to make sure you have an industrial base, an investment-led economy, but above all, an economy that utilizes technology to protect the environment, technology to create jobs, but also technology to share the wealth out within our society rather than hoarding it in the hands of the few. And so, challenging neoliberal economics is fundamental to what we believe in. And when I was first nominated for the leadership of the Labour Party in 2015, it was an interesting experience that was put upon me straight away. Very interesting. And the fundamentals of why we put my name forward to be leader of the party was nothing to do with me. It was to do with the principles behind what we're about, which is that austerity has been meted out on the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. They are the ones who've paid the price of the banking crisis of 2008. All the time, the very richest in our society have had tax breaks, giveaways, and tax havens. I tell you what, they're on borrowed time because the Labour government is coming to change things around. And that is why there was such a resonance in the party and in the movement and in the general election last year, when all the expert commentators on the planet wrote us off and saying, you're putting forward absurdly extreme ideas. I don't see anything particularly extreme in saying that I think rough sleeping is immoral and everyone should get a roof over their head. I don't think there's anything particularly extreme in saying a living wage should be for all workers at £10 an hour. You should have rights at work from the time you start your work. I don't think there's anything particularly extreme in saying that all schools should be properly funded so that head teachers don't have to decide which course to end and which member of staff to get rid of. What we put forward was actually basic common sense social justice. Socialism is about providing for all, but it's also about caring for all. And so I don't want to live in a society where 1 million people use food banks. I don't want to live in a society where people are rough sleeping. I don't want to live in a society where 1/4 of us get mental health problems and get very little support in dealing with them. Surely the kind of socialism we want is one that protects you in the sense of the provision of public services, but also gives you rights at work and democracy at the workplace. So the creative endeavor and genius that's in all of us is actually utilized, not just in school, but beyond that, in our rights at work and everything else. Now, I was fascinated by many of the workshops put down here in the World Transform, where you're discussing industrial democracy and the creative industries in this country. And I think that's a fantastic way forward. We live in a planet that is on its own. We're one planet. I know there are many people who send me emails every night saying they've discovered a new planet somewhere else. I'm slightly skeptical about some of these things that are said to me. And so I think we should look at what we're doing to this planet and look at the environmental requirements on all of us. We cannot go on with these levels of CO2 emissions, these levels of pollutants being put into the atmosphere and assume that somehow or other nothing is going to happen. And the sea will somehow or other magically eat up all the rubbish that we put into it, and the air will somehow or other purify itself. Then you look around the world and you look at the death rates from air pollution in big cities all around the world. It's bad here. It's worse in many African big cities. It's dreadful in many South Asian big cities. And these issues should not be counterposed saying, well, those of you that want to protect the environment are somehow or other anti-economic growth, which is the argument that Trump and his supporters use. I use the absolute opposite argument. Intelligent use of high technology, intelligent use of the information technology we've got can actually, and it does, create clean vehicles, clean transport, does create good quality, efficient, environmentally sustainable agriculture, and it doesn't have to be polluting in the way that it is. So Donald Trump saying he wants to walk away from the Paris Climate Change Accord and tear up all those decades of environmental campaigning that got us over that hurdle towards that place are totally wrong. And our movement has to be as strong on environmental protection and eco-protection as it is on social justice, because that is the way we protect the future for all of us. And so we will be developing energy policies. We will be developing energy policies which create far more renewable and sustainable energy. But it does mean there has to be the education process that goes with it. And I do think we need to look quite a lot at how we approach education and how we think about it. And that's why we put forward in the manifesto last year the principle of a national education service, the education from cradle to grave. I think education should be a benefit to the individual and a benefit to the community. Hence our proposal, which, yes, it's expensive, but I think it's the right way to invest our money, was to end college and university fees in order to make further and higher education free for everyone that wants to undertake it. But also ensuring that we give a good chance to everybody in order to undertake the education that they want to, because I get increasingly concerned at the over-competitive way in which schools are set in league tables against each other, and so much of our education service turns out to be in competition. That pressure then ends up on not all, hopefully only a few, but some schools looking askance at an underachieving 13 or 14-year-old, realize they're not going to do terribly well at GCSEs, never mind A-levels further down the line, so gently easing them out and moving them on. And those youngsters growing up in difficulties, can't cope, end up being excluded from school, and you know what? Too many of those end up in the criminal justice system, end up in prison, and end up with mental health difficulties. We have to look at education in a different way and see the creativity and value that is there in all of them, and I'm very determined that we should achieve that. And so there is so much that we're doing which is about policy development and is about understanding what we can achieve as a movement. But it means we've got to do the conversations and the debates ourselves, which is what we're doing, of course. But it's also about taking those campaigns out there to mobilize people, because winning an election is not going to be easy. We all know that. And it is about mobilizing people to win that election. Mobilize through strength. If you've stopped the government closing a hospital, if you've got more houses built, if you've got your street cleaner, your river cleaner, whatever it happens to be, people feel emboldened by success in campaigns. Imagine how much stronger everybody felt after the election last year. Very disappointed at not winning, but strengthened by our campaign and the sense of confidence that it gave us all. And so we reach out to all communities, but we also reach out around the world. I started by mentioning the situation in Yemen. And I conclude with this thought. There are now more refugees around the globe than there have ever been at any time in recorded history, including the periods after the First and Second World War. And those people are all victims of wars, human rights abuse, environmental degradation, utter poverty, and economic disasters. And they are trying to survive, living twilight existences or in refugee camps around the world. And many of those people are extremely angry. And we have to have a strategy and a policy which is about global economics as well, which is a package, if you like, of linking up with others to oppose neoliberal economics and austerity, but also to say the strategy of wars and intervention has created the refugee flows that many are now suffering from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. And so let's approach this refugee crisis with the humanitarian values of support for those people and do everything we can to work with others to give them a place of decency and safety. There are others across Europe and across the world who have a very different agenda. The rise of the far right in Central Europe, the rise of the far right, hopefully to a lesser extent, but nevertheless is present in this country, is an ominous and dangerous sign. Those that would seek to divide us against minorities will create an atmosphere of hate. That atmosphere of hate intensifies as they get nastier and nastier towards whichever minority they're choosing to blame. At the end of that process, you've created hate, you've created distrust, you've created oppression, and you've created a horrible atmosphere of violence. You haven't built a school, you haven't built a hospital, you haven't trained a teacher, you haven't educated a child. We have to stand as one community with all our pride in our diversity in order to be united to bring about the social changes, the social justice that our movement, our party was created to achieve. The World Transformed brings together people with experience, people with knowledge, people with ideas, people with imagination, people with hope. And it's people with imagination, hope, ideas, and that creative ability to organize with others that does transform our society, does transform our world, and does show that at the end of the day, popular movements coming together, united for social justice, are so much more powerful than anything that tries to divide us with a super competitive neoliberal economics. I know which side I'm on, I know which side you're on, I know which side we're all on. Together, we can win this. Thank you. Are you finished now? What?
No, one more.
Shall I head off?
Yeah, you can head off. You're allowed to. Huge round of applause for Jeremy Corbyn. Now we have one last speaker, and this is absolutely critically important. What Jeremy was just talking about there was one of the great injustices of our time. In Turkey, at the moment, there are people who are fighting with courage and determination against a dictatorship which is armed to the teeth by our own government. The Turkish regime has imprisoned journalists, it has victimized socialists and trade unionists and those who are fighting for Kurdish freedom and women and LGBTQ activists and so on. So it's absolutely critical that we talk now about what we can do in support and solidarity with those who are fighting in Turkey for democracy, and for human rights. So with that in mind, I want you to give a huge round of applause for the Honorary President and the former co-chair of the People's Democratic Party of Turkey, a socialist democratic party fighting for freedom in Turkey, Ertuğrul Kürkçü. Please give him a huge round of applause.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I feel myself very much privileged to be able to speak after the leader. So thank you, Jeremy Corbyn. Dear comrades and companions, I'm coming from Turkey. I'm the honorary chair of the People's Democratic Party. I bring you the greetings and solidarity of our party, of our jailed former leaders and deputies, alongside thousands of party activists, and our exiles in Europe and elsewhere, one of whom, former deputy Ibrahim Ayhan, we recently lost after heart attack in Havlar, Kurdistan, where he could not receive timely, adequate medical care. Yet in spite of all these losses, difficulties, setbacks, and of unfolding tyranny in Turkey, I'm proud to inform you that the one-man rule has failed in subjugating social and democratic forces of the country. After 3 years of emergency rule, the HDP has managed to protect its popular support in Kurdistan and extend its power bases to Turkey's industrial and commercial hubs, including Ankara, Istanbul, Izmir, Adana, Mersin, and Antalya, to gain 11.4% of the vote in the fraudulent 24 June elections. And we are keeping up the fight and continuing resistance and restructuring for further struggles. We are here as a solid example of the viability of a joint social and political movement of diverse strands of Kurdish and Turkish peoples to comprise a major political base for democracy and social change, and we are expecting to extend solidarity with your struggles and learn from your particular experiences of fighting organized evil, our common adversary. I am honored by the organizer's invitation to share the same floor with Jeremy Corbyn, whose resolute and outspoken leadership has been guiding the Labour reclaim its genuine meaning and content and help resurrect hope among workers, youth, and intellectuals in Britain that a world for many, not the few, is possible. We are witnessing that optimism and courage is on the rise among the working classes. Hope is haunting the suburbs, the sweatshops, the dockyards, the streets of Britain after all those years of negligence, despair, and cynicism under corrupt and arrogant leadership of the right. Labour's call is received by many now. And I'm also honored of sharing the floor with working class leaders and activists for social justice, Bonnie, Naomi, and Jacqui. You have been relentlessly striving for making the possibility a reality from within the capitalist castle, Britain, North America, and Canada. Your efforts are felt, your call is heard, and your message is received and echoed in the other parts of the world, in Turkey, in Kurdistan, in Palestine, in Latin America, Africa, and throughout the global south. And responded with increased resistance against neoliberal austerity programs and imperialist domination. Now we can confidently repeat the Liverpudlians' motto from this floor: you will never walk alone. I would like to take this opportunity of gathering around the theme, a world for many, not the few, in order to raise the need to launch a new initiative for a deliberate and organized international cooperation of the left and democratic forces against capitalist world order. As extensively explained in Jeremy Corbyn's address to the UN, the major impasse of the capitalist system global capitalist development is evident in the unequal distribution of wealth and power, in global ecological meltdown, in other words, the climate change, in the exodus from global south, in other words, the refugee crisis, and in wars caused by the use of unilateral military action and intervention rather than diplomacy and negotiation to resolve disputes and change governments. These phenomena altogether bring about a planetary crisis as an existential consequence of the capitalist system. Therefore, it cannot be resolved from within the system and by the governments who represent the corporate interests and are responsible for the outcome, thus leading a total crisis of humanity. On the other hand, the law of uneven and combined development merges the elements of advanced capitalism with outdated economic and social relations in every particular economy, in every country, as well as in the world economy. That is, in the 21st century, working classes are once again subjected to working and living conditions of slavery and serfdom under high-tech housing or mining facilities, while riot police and armies are equipped with robotic weaponry in order to suppress workers' protests and occupy overseas lands. Two stark examples I would like to give to understand what are we faced with and why our destinies are together. It was on the news yesterday that the two oil giants, Exxon and Shell, as far back as 1980s, were already aware of if oil consumption continued with the same pace, carbon dioxide levels would double the pre-industrial level by 2060, and that this would push the planet's average temperatures up by about 2 degrees centigrade over than current levels. Shell predicted this would happen even earlier, by 2030. They predicted an increase in runoff, destructive floods, and inundation of low-lying farmland. The changes may be greatest in the recorded history, they said. Yet, in spite of their predictions are now established facts, they still continue oil extraction in order to supply capitalist economy, and US President Donald Trump declares US's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord, while Turkish government echoes Trump that they will not ratify the accord because they could not pollute the air as much as the others have done. In Turkey or in Britain, the motto of the capitalist class and capitalist state remains as it is since birth: après moi le déluge, after me the flood. The second example is the parallelism between the Grenfell Tower fire in London in 2017 and Soma mine disaster in Turkey in 2014. Grenfell Tower fire caused the lives of 70 and 70 others were injured. In the Soma coal mine in western Turkey, 301 miners lost their lives after the mine collapsed following a fire. In Grenfell, the residents, despite all classy exterior appearance and smart systems in place, were heaped in a tower in full neglection of necessary security precautions, and in Soma, in spite of most up-to-date conveyor systems for transferring coal from the mine to the deposits, workers were forced to work with pickaxes without any break for hours, as it was in the 18th century mines, and without any security precautions for early fire alarm. In Grenfell, the system treated its working class inhabitants with the same neglection Ankara treated its workers in the Soma coal mine. Workers were forced to suffocate to death in their homes or workplaces. The reasoning was the same: to lower the production and housing costs in order to beat the law of falling profits. Soma is in London, London is in Soma. As we are passing through the 50th year of the 1968 uprising, the last upsurge of the global revolutionary moment, we have many reasons to expect a second knock by the postman on our doors. Unless changed now by combined efforts of all countries on earth, there may remain no world and no humanity change it later. Rosa Luxemburg had warned at the dawn of the 20th century, socialism or barbarism. All the themes we are elaborating here were already raised by the surge of human imagination, revolutionary determination, and hope and anger as millions rose up against capitalism after the call of the 1968 movement. It's high time to reconsider the merits and failures of the 60s revolutionary practices. I am inspired to see that Labour, under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, refutes all illusions and fetishisms imposed by the corporate media, the school, and the capitalist establishment, and encourages popular debate in the quest of a viable way out of capitalist exploitation for all the world. A genuine Liverpudlian, John Lennon, had in the 70s, criticizing the impact of mass culture on the working classes, had sung that a working class hero is something to be. Since the ebb of the 1968 revolutionary tide, both the working class and its heroism has undergone constant change, and today a working class hero could be anybody who dares standing up against capitalism for any particular form of alienation and exploitation. The anti-capitalist movement of the 21st century comprises of the oppressed of the earth, working classes, farmers, women, precarious workers, house workers, oppressed peoples, oppressed identities, permanently unemployed, surplus production. We comprise a particular part, a phase, a moment in the combined history of humanity raised on the shoulders of the working classes and all our particular stories as depicted in the poetry of Nazım Hikmet, boiled to a common dream. To live like a tree on your own and free, and like a forest in fraternity, this is what we are longing for. Thank you.
Well, thank you for such an inspiring and rousing speech with lots of incredible allusions, of course, to the amazing culture of this city, a city with a huge history of struggle and defiance. Now, before we're removed by security, just quickly, what can we all do to stand in solidarity with those struggling in Turkey for justice, for democracy, and for socialism?
I wish the Labour in opposition would push the Tory government not to join forces with oppression in Turkey, not to sell arms, not to turn its back what's happening in Turkey. And when in power, I wish Labour joins its forces with Turkey's opposition, who are the genuine defenders of the values of European humanism, socialism, feminism, anti-fascism, and part of this civilized world vis-à-vis the dictatorship now reigning in Turkey. I wish we will defeat all dictatorships across the globe. All together, we are going to unite and stand against fascism across the globe.
Well, friends, I think you'd all agree it's been an absolutely incredible panel. And what it's shown is that we need to join the dots. The the struggles against oppression and injustice and exploitation and bigotry and violence, that is one common struggle that knows no borders. So we've got to unite and link up as sisters and brothers as we fight for justice and for equality and against the global oppressors. Their time is coming to an end. And that is because of movements like those represented by this panel and by the people in this room. And we know that eternal truth, that the only way we get change is not waiting for the goodwill and generosity and charity of the powerful, but by people struggling from below with huge sacrifice and cost. And there has been huge sacrifice shown by the struggles of people on this panel, but history will damn the oppressors and exploiters. History is on our side as we build that new society and that new world. So let's go out, all of us, every single one, part of that movement. Let's finish off the job of our ancestors and let's stand united in solidarity.